Yo, what's up guys? It's the new sensation, Bigger Notation here, and today I'm going to be just giving a little rundown of my experience at Worlds, the deck that I chose, and kind of some reasoning behind some of the card choices and the deck that I actually went with, and just kind of an overall breakdown of what it was like at the World Championships. So as you can see here, with the runner-up gold Bardock SCR that we've got, I ended up coming second place overall at World Championships. I'm sure that a lot of you may have been watching and saw that last game. I do definitely I'm still, you know, kind of beating myself up over that last game just because there were some very, very obvious misplays. The big one being that I missed a charge turn 1 in game 3. But then I definitely was letting the stress and the nerves get to me during that game, which obviously led to that. And then that then got into my head and led to me making a lot more misplays down the line. So I do think I played that last game quite poorly, which I am a little disappointed with myself about. I do feel like had I played that game better, I won't say that I would have won it necessarily, because I don't want to, you know, discredit Philip in any way. He's an amazing player. So absolutely, I wouldn't say that I definitely win it or anything, but I do feel like it would have been a whole different game had I not been making those mistakes in that last game and letting that stress get to me. So it is a bit of a shame about that, but really can't complain coming second in the World Championships. At the end of the day, that's a huge achievement on its own, and the mistakes that I made are just a way for the revenge story and the comeback story to happen for next year when I take it all. So overall, second place, can't really complain, and we got the not the leader, the metal card to show for it, which is lovely. But I ended up going with Gamma, so not the obvious pick of Crimson, but still a very strong deck and a very well-known deck for this current format, I feel like. So why did I choose to go with Gamma? So for a really long time, I was going to play Blue Bojack. I was 100% set on Blue Bojack as soon as I saw those Dash Pack cards come out. I was like, I'm definitely playing Blue Bojack. It doesn't matter if it's not 100% the best choice. It is the choice that resonates best with me, because I've obviously played the deck a ridiculous amount. I know the deck in and out, and the fact that it got some amazing new support made me really want to just show it off at a high level. And what better than the highest level in the game being the Worlds stage. So I really wanted to bring Blue Bojack, and I spent a good few months testing it and learning the matchups against Crimson and against some of the other top decks. But it came to the week before Worlds and the weekend before leaving, and me and my teammate Peter Dance met up. Shout out to Peter. He was going to be coming to the LCQ with me to come join me at Worlds, because he would have easily taken the whole thing. But he had to unfortunately cancel his flights last minute due to an emergency, so unfortunately he wasn't able to make it. But shout out to Peter. We had a great weekend before the actual World Championships, where we just spent the entire weekend testing, and it was really, really useful for both of us, deciding what decks we were going to choose and everything. I don't think I actually tested out Blue Bojack on that weekend very much, but I'd been testing Bojack prior to that, and I was kind of using the weekend to test out any last minute switches and any other options that might just be like auto wins. And I felt like the Blue Bojack matchup into Crimson was fine, but as soon as they drew their SCR, it felt like you just lost the game like that turn or the turn after, because having to set up your board and your Unison after they dropped the Gohan SCR on you is like really, really hard to re-establish with the amount of pressure that they're able to put out, and especially in the early turns with the Piccolo and the potential of like 1-drop Self-Awakeners with Double Strike and Desperate Measures stopping your ramp in Bojack. I started to feel like Bojack was less and less of a solid choice, at least into the Crimson matchup. But on paper, it does look like a fairly playable matchup. It looks like a kind of a 50-50 one, I'd say, maybe 60-40 to Crimson. But it's not a bad matchup, I'd say, at all. It just, I started to get uncomfortable with some of the like, I felt like if people had the correct build to deal with Bojack, being the like more aggressive build with the Gohan secret and the 1-drop Self-Awakeners that gain Double Strike, or the Awakening Talent Pans as well, then I felt like Bojack maybe wasn't the right pick if I was expecting, because I was expecting 7 out of 8 Crimsons, to be honest, or like at least 6 out of 8. So I was expecting a lot of Crimson, and I was starting to feel like Bojack wasn't the pick, and I tested Gamma a little bit against Crimson over that weekend with Peter, and it felt really, really strong. And then I started learning about the idea of like just not swinging into Crimson with the Gamma leader, because obviously I'm not swinging into them with Bojack because I'm not drawing cards anyways. So that's one of the main positives about playing Bojack into Crimson. But I started to think about what if you do the same with Gamma, and one of my local friends, Jed, shout out to Jed as well, gave me that idea to just not swing at them at all, because he plays both Gamma and Crimson, so he kind of knows how both the decks work very well. So he gave me that idea, and it worked like a dream. I was just able to negate all of their leader swings, not swing with the leader, not swing at their leader at all, sorry, and then just stall and build up this massive advantage, because once you're Awakened, you're drawing cards without swinging, and then we're also running Unison to help deal with the Crimson matchup. So that started to feel really strong and like a really favorable matchup in game 1. Because you can just stall, drop Turning the Tide, and most people aren't main decking the Jiren, I figured. And if they were, then it ended up being open deck list, so I'd find out. And then the Turning the Tide, not only does it shuffle away their hand, but it also shuffles away the Saiyans in their drop area. So as long as they don't have a massive board of barrier cantrips, you're kind of fine to just stop them awakening from turn 7 onwards with the Turning the Tide. And then you try and kill them on the Turning the Tide turn or the turn after. So that started to feel like a really favourable matchup once I started playing it, especially at least in the game 1 sense. And then like Gamma just kind of does well into every other deck as well, because it's a very well-built deck. Like all of the archetype cards and the entire idea behind the archetype about the value that it gets from playing cards from energy is just super, super strong. And all of the floodgates it got, and the new Android 17 TP are just insane. So that's kind of my reasoning behind picking Gamma, is I started to feel like it really did well into Crimson, at least in the game 1. And then games 2 and 3, I had a bit of flexibility in the sideboard to try and switch my win condition from Android 17 to try and help pressure Crimson a bit differently in the games 2 and 3, I'd say. So that ended up working out well. And I did end up facing a Crimson in round 1. I'm surprised I only played against one Crimson, but we did manage to knock out the most of the Crimsons in round 1, well, with most of the Americans going out, or all of the Americans going out, in fact, which was amazing for the EU. We had to represent, so I'm glad we got to pull that off. But yeah, that first Crimson match went pretty much exactly how I had been testing it. He did play it really, really well. Obviously, I mean, it's Worlds, so of course he's going to play it really well. But he was making plays that I hadn't kind of considered in testing that made things harder, and he did have some strong main deck stuff for it. Like, I think he had Black Smokes and Apes in the main deck, which kind of means that he can keep his hand size up alongside my Unison and my leader skill to draw 2 every turn. He used a Gohan SCR, like, not to kill me, but just to clear my board, so that I had to redevelop it. And by that point, I was kind of like running out of time to stall his Awaken, because I was running out of negates. So I just had to kind of go for it, which was scary. And he also baby aped on the Turning the Tide, which obviously doesn't stop the effect, because Turning the Tide has deflect, but he managed to get an extra draw after the Turning the Tide and bottom deck the Turning the Tide. So shout out to my first round opponent. He was, yeah, definitely a formidable one. And I mean, shout out to all my opponents, really. They were all formidable, and they were all also really lovely people. It was honestly a dream come true just to show up at Worlds, not even to play, just to meet so many amazing players and lovely people as well. Like, I feel like I really learned a lot from being there, about myself and about the game as well. But it was also just lovely to hang out with some lovely people, as well as them being some of the best in the world. So it really was a dream come true, and I do massively appreciate the opportunity there, and I'm excited to come back next year to win it all, which I will. But we'll hop into the breakdown. I'll try not to cover, like, obviously what the cards do and everything. I'm sure you guys are fairly familiar with Gamma stuff at this point. But I'll mainly just be trying to talk about, like, my tech choices when it comes to going into the Worlds format. And it is important to bear in mind that Worlds format is very different to a standard format. Effectively, it was a glorified locals, because this time around there was no group stage or anything. It was just 3 straight rounds. But also the fact that there's only 8 players means you have to only consider so many decks. There's only so many decks that you can take into consideration, and you can also make predictions based on what the meta looks like, and what people have played previously in other tournaments, and like what people's play styles are. Like you can really just target certain people when it comes to a format like this. So going into the main deck, I mean, obviously we have the 4 Unison, we have the 4 Unison Searcher, and I'm still on 2 of the Android 18. I will preface this by saying this is still a 50 card list. I'd never go above 50 with Gamma especially, but never in general really. But I feel like with Gamma, especially because you have to see your Unison early on to awaken, you need to run 50 just to have that maximum consistency. Like, it's even more important than I would say in other decks. But I would still say in other decks, I still really just like running 50 cards. You want that consistency in every deck. And I still wanted to keep 2 of this Android 18 in, again, for the consistency. And I really struggled to keep it in with the new set stuff that's come out. But I managed to keep 2 copies in, and I was very grateful to do that, because it's also important as another checkland, as checkland number 5 and 6. And the reason for that is you have Jiren in the Z deck, which was like one of the biggest MVPs going into a blue meta. But you also have the Cell, and sometimes you can struggle to find your other checkland, so this one just works just as well. And especially later into the game against Crimson, if you're dropping the other checkland, you're playing that from your energy a lot alongside your cells, then you're going to need these later on in the game once you're preparing to drop Turning the Tide, just so you can develop your last couple of cells. And then we also have the 4 Android 18 counterplays. I was trying this at 3 for a little bit because I figured with a blue meta, there's not actually all that much you need to worry about counterplaying. Like originally I was running 4 of this for the Broly Crown when it came to EU finals, but red is like not as potent as it used to be just because decks like Crimson are really countering SS4 and Sin. So I feel like this card... I've started to feel like this card wasn't as necessary as before, but then I started to test against more Crimson builds that ran Self-Awakeners, and the main thing against Crimson is you can't really prevent them from getting the 5 Saiyans in the drop. Even if you negate all of their leader swings, they can just combo 5 Saiyans, or you'll be removing their Saiyans as well, so like there's no real way to prevent them getting the 5 Saiyans in the drop effectively, because that's on their autonomy. They can combo the 5 Saiyans whenever they need to if they just need to awaken. But when it comes to taking their own life, that's where they actually struggle if you don't attack them, because they have to take their life with their leader skill, which means they have to enter combat, which means if you negate their leader skill, they're not taking life. So I felt like a lot of Crimson builds would be running Self-Awakeners, so I started to try out 4 copies of this, and originally I was running 3 of the where's the Gohan? 3 of this Gohan, but I cut it down to 2 in the end, in the place for the 4th copy of this, which I felt like it was a really good call because this is very important against Crimson builds that run Self-Awakeners, and I was really scared of people running Awakening Talent Pan, because that is a Self-Awakener that then saves itself for next turn. And so you have to be able to counterplay it. There's no other way to deal with that card. You could, in theory, run Realms, but I think that the counterplay is just a better option to deal with the Awakening Talent Pan. And it also hits the Surmounting the Impossible Z battle card if they need to take just 1 more life to get to 4. And it also happens to hit Beerus, which is also very relevant when it comes to the mid-game. So I do feel like 4 is still correct of the Android 18. I really did try it at 3, but it felt like every turn I was just missing one. Or I'd get through 3 and I'd be like, damn, I really need 1 more right now. But yeah, you definitely need 4 of this still. It's absolutely still a 4 of. And it's just a broken card when it comes to like almost every matchup. Like there's always a good target to hit with this card in no matter what the deck. And then top 5 searches and energy fixtures. We have 4 Android 17 and 2 Android 18. I still think this is correct. You could argue that the crit is more important when it comes to a blue matchup, and we are in a blue meta, so you want more of the crits. But I still think the barrier is more important. The crit, it's not really relevant because when it comes to, like, we are in a blue meta, but we're mostly in a Crimson meta. And when it comes to Crimson, if you're swinging a crit into them, then they're just going to use a Realm or something to combo out, whereas the barrier means that you can have it stick about, stall them a lot longer with their awaken. So you just stall them with you stop them awakening, and then you have the barrier guys sit there, and then once you let them awaken and drop Turning the Tide, you have 4 15k swings that they just couldn't interact with, as opposed to like crits. I feel like the crits is just such a greedy idea to go for when it comes to playing against Crimson. I feel like the crits, yeah, it's just too greedy in a lot of matchups to go for the crits when you need the barrier guys. And as well against Trunks Cheetah, which is also, well, it's the best yellow deck right now. It has been for a long time. You need 4 of that Android 17, so you can never go 3 and 3, I feel like. And I don't think there's space to just up this to a 3rd copy. And then the checklands, we're obviously running 4. And cells, we're running 3. I'm still adamant that you only need 3 copies of this card. Especially in a blue meta, Dirty Burst is a thing, so you don't want to run 4 of this. It's just going to be dead. There are some times where like you struggle to find this card, which does hurt. But then you just want to be searching that and being mindful of that when you're searching off your top 5 searches with the 17 and 18 here. And a lot of the time you can just use the Cell Z battle card as a replacement to this. Like if you don't find this card, you just use the Cell Z battle card and it's effectively the same thing a lot of the time, so it's not too impactful if you don't see it a lot of the time. And then the new busted card is the Android 17. We run 4 of this. Another important thing to note is with the top 5 searches, previously with the Red Ribbon top 5 searcher, when I was running the Android 19 to help deal with specifically Sin a lot more, you could search that off of this top 5 searcher, but this one you can't. And I've effectively straight swapped these guys out for the Android 19s. But you can search them with the Android 18 searcher, which is another reason why you want to still be running this card, just for that consistency, seeing this card. And it's very important to see this card against Crimson, because it's just another 1-drop negate, but it's actually searchable, whereas a lot of your 1-drop negates in this deck aren't. And Crimson was a matchup that made me want to put in Android 19s again, the 1-drop negate that I used to run, just because it's more searchable than this card. I would never replace this card with Android 19s, but I just wanted like extra 1-drop negates in there to deal with Crimson a bit more. Because there are times where you struggle to find that that negate for their leader swing, which can be very impactful in that matchup. But there's just no space to run that card anymore, and it's not a very good card, to be honest. It's just a meta cool when it came to playing against Red Sin. And then we have 3 of the Android 14s. I still think you only need 3 of this. I think 4 is kind of overkill. It's searchable by both of your top 5 searches. It's searchable by your Android 17 and Android 18. And it just gets super hard punished by cards like T-Blow, the Desperate Measures in blue. Any sort of counterplay hard punishes this card. And the fact that you have 4 of this card now, which is 1 energy cheaper, doesn't cost you a card in hand if it gets counterplayed, but effectively does a similar thing. It means that you just don't really need 4 of this card, I don't think, because you still have your 7 floodgates, and then you've got the Gohans, which we'll get into as well. And again, against Crimson, this is sometimes you're just using this as a negate for their leader swing. If they swing leader first, which a lot of Crimson players do, because they want to see if they can see more cards with their leader skill before like planning out what their turn is going to be. So if they swing with leader first, you can just Android 14 it. If they don't have the Desperate Measures, or they're not running it, or they don't have the Baby Ape, then you could just shut down their entire turn if they had anything else to play with. And something else that's important to remember when it comes to playing against Crimson for this deck is just regulating their Z energy, because with all of the floodgates that you're dropping, they're not going to be dropping much Z energy, and because you're negating all of their leader swings as well, so they can't get much Z energy, especially if you don't attack into them. And so the Z energy, like they're not going to be able, you want to be regulating how often they can drop cards like the Cell Z battle card to clear your board, or the Beerus Z battle card to clear your barrier guys or bigger guys off. And the reason for that is if they start clearing your board, then it's going to be a lot harder to kill them on the Turning the Tide turn, because even with Turning the Tide, that deck is still really hard to kill, because a lot of the times they still manage to find a way to awaken just by seeing 1 Saiyan off their life. And if you crit a couple of Saiyans off their life as well, then like it's more Saiyans in the drop for them to awaken. So even with Turning the Tide, that deck is still really hard to kill, so you do have to build a very big board just to be able to deal with that matchup. So it's very important to regulate how much Z energy they're able to generate and kind of negate attacks in accordance to that, or floodgate them in accordance to that. Like if you see they have 1 Z energy up, then you're more inclined to drop this guy down just so that they can't swing with their Unison or another battle card to get another Z energy and then drop a Cell on you. And when it comes to Beerus, you're not so worried about Beerus because you have the counterplays for that, but you do want to save counterplays for Self-Awakeners, ideally in Crimson matchups, especially if it's not open deck list, which I feel like a lot of the time it won't be. Luckily for me it was, although I didn't know it was open deck list until like the day before. But yeah, the Android 18 counterplay, you can use it for Beerus, but a lot of the time you want to save it for the Self-Awakeners, unless you really need to stop a Beerus coming down, because you need to keep building that board. Super combos, I'm still on the Android 8. I really wanted to run the Android 18 Bionic Blitz. It is, I think, better against Crimson, and I think it's just better in this meta in general. But the issue with that card is it's a multicolor with energy exhaust, and so you can't charge it. And it's also not searchable off the Red Ribbon Army top 5 searcher, and for those two reasons I went with this card, which seems like really like irrelevant reasons, but honestly, like, a lot of the time I was just charging these cards, because what you can do is you can Turning the Tide, and then if you don't kill them, you just pick up 3 super combos from your energy and draw a card at the end of your turn. And that would happen a lot in testing, where I would just need to do that. But also, like, there are lots of times where you need the floodgates and you need the counterplays in your hand, and so you just have to charge these from your hand, because like this deck has a very low hand size a lot of the time. So there's a lot of times where you just have to charge these so that you can floodgate them next turn, or, you know, that kind of thing. So it is very relevant that you can charge these without them coming in rest mode. And it's also very relevant that they're searchable, just because everyone likes searchable super combos. And with the Android 17s being just androids and not Red Ribbon armies, the searchability of this deck has gone down quite a lot, so you do want to make sure you still have targets for the Red Ribbon searcher. So I would really like to run the Android 18 super combo, and maybe it is worth kind of messing around with a bit more, but I still think this one is just correct just for those big reasons. And also, like, against Crimson, if they do manage to awaken and start going aggressive onto you, as long as it's in the mid to late game, you still have a decent chance at winning that game. So these super combos are still relevant. But like, these super combos are not bad by any means. I just think that the Android 18 ones are a little bit better when they're used. But I think in general these ones are better because they're more flexible, if you know what I mean. And then we get into the anti-Crimson stuff mainly. We have 3 Boo Unison. Boo Unison is just an anti-blue card at this point, because blue doesn't have a way to deal with Unisons right now. And I guess you could consider an anti-black card as well. But like, a lot of the time, like, red has decent Unison removal now with all of the Unison minusing stuff that it's got. And that it's getting in the next set as well. And green obviously has the Gohan rare. And then, I mean, yellow, this card is obviously very good against yellow still, but I feel like yellow just cares less about this. I mean, it's mainly an anti-yellow and blue card, I'll say that. But it's mainly there for Crimson, and also for the existence of Black Smoke, because they Black Smoke your Unison on like turn 2 or turn 3, and then you drop this on turn 4, and it just doesn't matter. They just wasted a Black Smoke, which they could have used to draw 2. But also against Crimson, this is another way to just passively draw cards where you don't have to attack them, which is huge. But it's also a way to kind of, it means that you can use a 1-mana negate on their leader swing, and then if they start swinging with battle cards, you can minus off their battle cards to the bottom of the deck, and then that'll stop them generating Z energy. So it really does just continue to limit their attacks each turn, which is huge. But it's also for that passive draw power, which is great. But against a lot of matchups that aren't Crimson, I just find myself not playing this card and sticking with the 2-drop Unison, at least until they Black Smoke it, and then I might consider playing this card. But a lot of the time, this card is just there for either Crimson or to deal with a Black Smoke if you get Black Smoked on turn 2 or turn 3. And something nice that you can do is you can wait to play your Unison, or you can kind of play your Unison with Black Smoke in mind, because they kind of want to Black Smoke you the turn that you play your Unison. So if you play your Unison, your 2-drop Unison, on a turn where they would otherwise want to be putting pressure onto you, say with a Piccolo the Infiltrator, and you might not be able to deal with that otherwise, then you can play your Unison down and kind of have it sit there, and then they're forced to either Piccolo you or they have to Black Smoke you. And if they don't Black Smoke you, then you get more Z energy, which is huge for this deck. And if they do Black Smoke you, then you're saving yourself 2 20k attacks to the face. So there's that as well to consider, which is something that I would do a lot. I would just hold my 2-drop Unison sometimes, so that I wouldn't get pressured so much on their turn 3 or turn 4. And then when they drop the Black Smoke on me, I can just follow it up next turn with the Boo Unison. And it's especially relevant against Crimson builds that run Boo Unison as well, because that's becoming a more common thing. Because again, Boo Unison is an anti-blue card, and people are expecting to play against Crimson, which is blue, so people are running Boo Unison in Crimson. So there's some, like, what you can do now as well is just drop your, say you're going, this is if you're going second mainly, if you drop your 2-drop Unison on your turn 3 and awaken, and then make use of the rest of your energy, pick up 3, draw 1, put down 3, then because you have 3 open energy, they can't really attack to kill your Unison. They have to black smoke it basically, because otherwise you can just floodgate them out or negate them out. And so going into their turn 4, they're then forced to either choose to black smoke your Unison or drop their Unison. And if they black smoke your Unison, that's fine. You just drop your Boo Unison next turn, and then you're effectively a turn ahead of them at that point. And if they don't black smoke you, then you have then you can turn one of your 15k swings into a 20k swing to attack the Boo Unison, and by that point your Unison should be around 4 or 5 markers, so you should be able to get that minus effect off to swing 2 more times into their Boo Unison, and then you have Jiren to finish it off. And because of all of the Z energy you generated, because they didn't black smoke your Unison, Jiren becomes just like super easy to wipe through a Boo Unison. So that's kind of the thought process behind Boo Unison. Hopefully that made sense. I know there's a lot of there's a lot to go towards this card being played now in Gamma. And I never used to like it, but I think with the existence of Black Smoke, you just have to run a replacement Unison. And then for 1-drop negates, I'm on 2D Magic and 1 Dirty Burst. So I was originally just on the 3D Magic, and I was side decking the second Dirty Burst, because I've got 1 in the side as well. But then I found out it was open deck list like the night before the event. And I was like, well, in the case that I play against SS4, I need to be at least main decking 1 of this. I didn't expect anyone who was in the actual Worlds tournament to be playing SS4, but I imagined that somebody could come high in LCQ with SS4. So then they would be, I think they were forced to play the same lists, which was kind of crazy, but we moved from that. I think they were forced to play the same lists as they did in LCQ. So I figured if somebody does sneak through with SS4 in LCQ, then I probably need at least 1 of this in the main, just to give them that fear factor of like, you can't drop the 8-drop because I have 3 energy up and I have this in hand. Even if I don't have it in hand, just the fact that it's open deck lists, and they will know then that if I don't run this, then they know that I don't run it, so they can drop the 8-drop without fear. But if they do know that I run 1 copy of it, they have to constantly be scared of it. So that was my reasoning for then switching for 2D Magic and 1 Dirty Burst. Otherwise, I would have been on 3D Magic and 0 Dirty Burst in main. But mostly these are just 1-drop negates against Crimson. But the D-Magic is better because it has Sparking 5 and it can also untap occasionally, but most people are going to be running Ball Ghost or Chi-Chi to stop D-Magic stuff, that kind of thing. And then continuing with anti-Crimson stuff, we have 2 of the Gohan. This does a lot against Crimson. The only real targets for Crimson to bottom deck with this card to let battle card swings go through are the Videl negate, which most of the time they want to get in their drop anyway, so they probably haven't been using those to negate your swings very much, or been holding them in their hand. And the Black Smoke. Now, Black Smoke is a bit of an issue against this deck because it can give them draw power, which can kind of keep them putting the pressure onto you whilst they're not awakened, which is crazy. And then they can use it as a bottom deck tool for this. But if they're not running a Unison, you can have just some turns where you combo this in, or even if they are running a Unison and you're using this as an extra 5k to attack their Unison and then you can play it down after. There are turns where you can just use this activate main and then save a 1-drop negate for their leader swing, and you get a free pass to next turn. If they don't have a Unison at that point, then they basically just can't do anything. And especially if you have Boo Unison up by that point, even if they get 1 battle card swing through, you just -1 it and it doesn't matter. So this card does a lot of work against Crimson, and it just does a lot of work in general. Like against a lot of decks, it's crazy. Against Trunks Jita, they have very few non-barrier like weenie guys that they can bottom deck. It's pretty much just the 1-drop Vegeta negate. And against SS4 as well, the only real target that they can bottom deck is the 1-drop Goku that searches top 5. So like this card is just kind of crazy. And I did move a 3rd to the side because originally I was maining 3 of this, but I had to find space for that Android 18. And then the tech, I suppose. We have 2 Not Even a Scratch in the main. I have to give a massive shout out to Philip for this one. Me and Philip and Poe ended up testing quite a bit together in the days leading up to Worlds because we had nothing really better to do, especially me because I'm 19. I couldn't gamble or drink or anything in Las Vegas. So we just ended up testing a bunch, and it really paid off, to be honest. Especially because we each took turns like testing against the Crimson build that I had brought. And so we each kind of knew how to deal with Crimson by that point as well. But Philip had the idea for the not even a scratch tech, and he also had some copies on him to lend me, which was perfect. But the idea is it's just a 1-drop negate, so it effectively functions the same as the D-Magics and the Dirty Bursts in the Crimson matchup, because those you are just using as stop the leader swing. But then later on you can just tap one and draw a card. And so it effectively acts as a 1-drop negate for the leader swing, but then it's kind of like an ape in the drop area as well, which is huge. And I did end up siding a 3rd copy of this, and I was considering going to 3 in the main and siding a 4th, but I was worried with the off-color against some of the non-Crimson matchups. Game 1, this might be a little bit less good. But honestly, this card overperformed, even in the non-Crimson matchups. It just felt crazy. So honestly, going forward, this could just be like a good card to run in Gamma. But especially in this format where Crimson is going crazy, you definitely want to be running this card. And then last 2 cards, the 2 secret rares, we have Gohan SCR and Android 17. These are the 2 cards you look for against Crimson. If you don't find one of these 2 cards, you don't attack them. If you find one of these 2 cards, you start thinking about attacking them. That's pretty much how the matchup goes. It's a really uninteractive matchup. Like, if you don't enjoy... Like, if you actually like playing the game, don't play this deck. Just play, like, another deck that can maybe deal with Crimson a bit differently. But, yeah, it's super uninteractive to play against Crimson with this deck. You literally just don't swing, negate all of their attacks, stall until you find one of these cards, and then try and win the game on that turn. It's really boring, I won't lie, but it's just the way you have to play against Crimson, and that's why I kind of want to see a big hit to Crimson this list, because the way that you deal with Crimson is just by not playing the game, and it sucks. But that's the full list, 50 cards, and that is the main deck that I took to Worlds. And then going into the Z deck, it's fairly standard. We have the 1 Jiren. This card is like a super huge MVP, and a big reason why I kept the 2 Android 18 searches in. Especially in a blue meta, this card is crazy, because like I said previously, Boo at this point is an anti-blue and yellow card. And this card, so everyone's going to be running blue to deal with Gamma, but also the other decks that are blue and yellow. And this card just deals with Boo Unison on its own, but it also means that, like, because of the effect that it can't be removed by skills, it turns on your Android 17 floodgate. Because the Android 17 floodgate doesn't require you to have a blue Z battle card in play, it just has to be a Z battle card. So if you have this guy on the board, even if you swing with it and it's in rest mode, you use the effect to like kill their Unison, swing double strike into their Unison, it's dead. And then it can't be removed by skills, so there's no way that they can deal with this card. Even if they negate its skills, I think it's a lingering effect, so it doesn't matter. And then the only way that they can kill this card is by attacking, and if they attack, you just go Android 17, Floodgate, and then you get another free turn. If this guy survives, which a lot of the time it does, if they played another Unison, because with this card it only hits battle card attacks, they're incentivized to play another Unison because they want to get more swings through. If they play another Unison, this guy probably lived, just kill it again. It's really dumb. It's really dumb. This card is like the biggest MVP. The only reason I wasn't on more than 1 copy is because it's 2 green specified. If it was, if there was more green in the deck, or if there was less specified green on this card, I'd easily be on like 2 or 3 copies. But this card is like insanely good for what it does. And then 2 Beerus. There have been times where I've considered cutting this card down to 1 just because of the prominence of Desperate Measures and other counterplays specifically to deal with this card, but also to deal with Floodgates in this meta. So because like there's a lot of times where you just can't play this card because your opponent might have the counterplay, and if they have the counterplay, you lose. So a lot of the time you just can't play this card because you have to play around that shit, which does suck. And so I have considered cutting this down to 1 just to make more space in the Z deck, but I think you kind of still have to run 2. It's just that good of a card. I don't know. And in the longer games, there are definitely times where you go through 2 and you maybe miss even seeing a 3rd. And then I was on 1 Goku. This was like a last minute addition. It never came up. I was originally on 2 Vegito instead of this card, but I switched to this card because I figured like it's just a nice comeback tool to have. It never came up. It's still worth running, I think, but it's, I don't know. It's one of the weaker cards in the Z deck for sure. 2 Cell. It's free in this deck because you're untapping 3, so Like, you can actually get away with running 2 of this card, and it's fine, really. And then the 1 Vegito, again, this card didn't come up. But these 2 cards are the weaker cards in the Z deck. But there are some games against Crimson where you can just slam this card on like turn 5 if you've got the Z energy. And then if you have it backed up with the Android 18 counterplay, they have no real out to it. Because they can't Beerus it, because you counterplay the Beerus. The only real out is Black Smoke, and if they're Black Smoking on this, they've probably Black Smoked your Unison. That's 2 Black Smokes down. They may be running a 3rd one in the main deck, but most people I think are only maining 2. And then they're like really limiting the rest of their draw power throughout the game. And you've also, like, the value you get from this card on the turn that it's played is fine as well, just because you get a card out their hand and a card off the board. So this card is really, really strong into Crimson. There's no real point where you drop 2 against Crimson, I feel like, though, because of the Z energy cost. And because you're not attacking them, and they're probably Black Smoking your 2-cost Unison, you're not generating all that much Z energy. So getting to 6 Z energy against Crimson is kind of tricky. And even getting to 3 is tricky very often, because you don't want to attack them to generate Z energy. And if they're attacking you, then they've probably Black Smoked your Unison already. So that's the main reason why I cut this down from 2 to 1 and put in an extra, like, 1 of the Gokus. But it's kind of personal preference at that point, I feel like. And then going into the side deck, again, bear in mind this is a side deck specifically for Worlds, so it's very tailored to that kind of format. I feel like if it were a different event, like a Regionals or a Zenkai Cup or anything, it would be maybe a slightly different list. I feel like the list is kind of fine as is, but the side deck would probably be a bit different. For the side deck, we're on 3 Black Smoke. I was maybe too respectful of SS4 going into this, I think, because this is mainly for SS4, but it's also for the mirror, so that's the main reason why I had 3 of this. But I think I honestly could have got away with 0 Dirty Burst in main or side, and been fine, because even if there was 1 or 2 SS4 that got through an LCQ, which I think was unlikely, but very possible still, even if there was that, like, 1 or 2 SS4, there's no guarantee I'd play against them, because of the way that the tournament was structured. It was 3 rounds, if you get to the finals, that is, even if there is possibility for you to just play 1 round. So, like, if there was an SS4 that snuck through, the likelihood of me pairing them is very low, but also the likelihood of them pairing a Crimson player is very high, and they're probably going to lose to Crimson, because Crimson kind of counters that deck. So I was maybe a bit too respectful of SS4, and maybe could have just gone with 0 Dirty Burst. I think that was my main mistake in the deck building, in hindsight, but it's not the biggest mistake in the world. I mean, it's not as big of a mistake as missing your charge turn 1, so what can I really say at that point? But I still think 3 Black Smoke is fine, because yes, it does hit SS4, but it also mainly hits the Gamma mirror. I do think Gammas should, like, if I were to play a mirror, I would expect them to be running Boo Unison. So I would consider I would still, I think, use the Black Smoke on their turn 3. Maybe not their turn 2 if they've got the Unison turn 2, but probably on their turn 3 I'd use it. And maybe just not swing at them on turn 2, so they can't get the Z energy, but they also can't get the extra marker to 25k dual attack me on turn 3. And then Black Smoke them turn 3, so that then they can't just drop another Unison, another 2-drop Unison, and punish me from there. But then they drop Boo Unison, which is fine, because then I follow it up with my Boo Unison. And then I can use the rest of my... It prevents them from generating Z energy as the main thing, but I can use the rest of my Black Smokes to just draw cards or remove barrier threats if I need to. But this is mainly there kind of as a more flexible draw rape, but most of the time it's probably getting used to draw cards, but it also has the added benefit of hitting some Unisons and also hitting barrier cards if you need them. So, I mean, again, against the mirror you can hit Vegito out, so it's sometimes worth saving the card for that. The 3rd, not even a scratch. This is mainly just for Crimson, although I feel like this could go in the main, to be honest. I feel like this card is just really, really good, especially in this deck, because you don't have to worry about fixing your energy too much, because you have, like, in-archetype energy fixes, so you don't have to worry about, like, Xeno super combos or anything when you ramp this from top of deck. But also, it's the fact that this deck untaps 3 every turn, so paying 1 for just a 1-drop negate that doesn't really do anything else on that turn is fine, but also paying 1 to draw a card is also very good, because this deck has enough energy, it just doesn't have enough cards in hand. So this card is, yeah, again, really snapped. Bad Omen, The idea was side out turning the Tide games 2 and 3, side in Bad Omen. I found out it was open deck list, and suddenly that strategy got a lot weaker because it kind of doesn't take people by surprise then. But they still have to side in Jirans to respect the turning the Tide, so it's still like a fine strategy to go through, I think. And Bad Omen combined with the secret rare is 2 life burnt. So if you can find both of those, and that is really what I was digging for in that last game against Philip, was the Bad Omen, but it ended up being like my next life or something, so that was a shame. But yeah, if I had seen that Bad Omen, we could have burnt it from 1 to 0, which would have been great. But, you know, things happen. But yeah, the Bad Omen and the SCR burn for 2, which is great to take people by surprise, and also against Crimson, taking them from 2 to 0 is huge, because a lot of the time, if you're like you against Crimson games 2 and 3, you want to be pressuring them a lot harder, so you want to be trying to get them down to lower life without the turning the Tide, because they're probably siding in Jirans. So you do have to kind of respect that. And then we also sided the 3rd Gohan Floodgate, and this was again to go in against Crimson. These 3 were kind of the 3 that went in against Crimson. This card is just really snaps. Like I said, I was maining the 3rd copy. I had to move it to the side deck because the 4th Android 18 is just too valuable, but the 3rd copy is fine here. 2nd Dirty Burst, again, I mean, if you're playing in a Regionals or a Zenka Cup, I think you have to main 2 Dirty Burst probably, because there will be SS4 in those formats. But I think for a Worlds format, I could have definitely got away with just not running this card and being fine. 2 Krillin the Cunning. I was kind of back and forth on this card, but I had open side deck slots, and so I just figured I'd slap them in. And I also found out that Poe was on Blue Beerus, and he was playing the Kaioken SCR, so I figured might as well chuck these in because it will help that matchup. And then it also turned out that Duval was on the Kaioken SCR because he was playing a slower build of Crimson, which was interesting. So this also would have been helpful against him. And it did end up being very helpful because round 2 my opponent was either going to be Poe or Duval, and it ended up being Poe. So it definitely put in the work against him, but yeah, my round 2 opponent was guaranteed to be playing Kaioken, so I was kind of like, I was very happy that I put this card in. Originally, I was just siding the 1 copy, but then I went through my list the night before LCQ, and just found that I had an open side deck slot, so I figured I'd just put a 2nd copy in to see more copies. And then 2 Desperate Measures. This is, I have to give a massive shout out to Poe for this one as well. He gave me the counter to his deck. Obviously, Desperate Measures is great against Blue Beerus because it stops their early ramp. My logic with this deck specifically was that I didn't need Desperate Measures because I had the Android 18 counterplay. And if I went first, then I would be able to do that for their turn 2 ramp. But if I went second, there wasn't really a way for me to stop it. And so going second, if they don't see their 1-drop Whis, they have to rely on the Z-Battle card, and this card stops that if I just pass with an Energy Open. And I don't really have any 1-drops, so this card I am passing with an Energy Open turn 1 a lot of the time, unless I'm siding in like Cunnings and dropping them turn 1. So this card is like good against Blue Beerus, obviously, and Poe pointed that out to me, but the main thing he pointed out to me was that I was running Absolute Release Balls in the side deck, because I figured it just felt like a better Desperate Measures other than specifically for turn 1 against Blue Beerus, which I felt like was kind of, if I went second, I can give them a ramp, that's fine. But what Poe pointed out to me was that obviously Absolute Release Ball is a little more situational with that you have to be at 4 or less life, but you can also Sparking to effectively untap an energy and counterplay, which is crazy. But yeah, Poe pointed out to me that in the mirror match, which is mainly what the Absolute Release Ball is for, you can use this to obviously counterplay their floodgates, but then bounce your own floodgates back to your hand for your next turns. So yeah, this card is like definitely better than Absolute Release Ball in the mirror, I feel like. And it's not guaranteed that you'll be at 4 or less life, because you only go down to 6 on Awaken, and there's no way to take your own life in this deck. So this card just felt better for the mirror. And so I have to give a shout out to Poe for that one as well. And then 2 Borgos. I kind of put this in again to deal with the mirror, and also to deal with Blue Beerus, and also just to deal with blue in general. I figured that I was not going to side this in against Crimson specifically, because of a couple reasons. First of all, a big one being that I didn't have much to take out against Crimson in the main deck, because I had main decked specifically to deal with Crimson, so that I could deal with them game 1 and then side in a couple of extra options to help with the games 2 and 3. So I didn't feel like there was really space for me to take out anything for the Borgoses against Crimson, but also there is that possibility that because once they get to Sparking 5, you have to start like playing around their Sparking D magic so that they can't take themselves down to 4 with their negates there. And so you can't really swing at their battle cards too much there. So a big worry of mine was that if I did swing into their battle cards, if they were on like 6 or 7 life, and I could maybe afford to let them take 1 life for a Sparking D magic there. My fear was that if they did do that, if I had Borgos out, they might intentionally untap energy so that they could crit themselves down to 4. Because I think actually against Crimson, they might be motivated to do that in certain scenarios because the Awaken is just that strong. And once they awaken, like, this deck can definitely struggle against them a lot more than it does when they're not awakened. So my main concern was that they were going to crit themselves down to 4 by taking a life with the Sparking D magic and then untapping intentionally to crit themselves down a life and drop an energy off. So like, yeah, that was my main worry there. I mean, it is an optional burner life, so maybe I can side him in against Borgos, but still, it worries me, you know, it worries me. And then, I mean, actually, wait, is it optional? Let me read this. Switches the energy to active mode with a counter skill. Place up to 1 of your opponent card in your opponent's life and 1 card in their energy to the drop area. Okay, so it is an optional burner life. To be honest, I didn't know that beforehand, so I thought they would always crit a life, so they could untap an energy and just crit themselves down to 4. So you can choose not to crit them a life, which maybe you just do that. But that was my main reasoning behind not siding this card in. So maybe you can side it in, to be honest. But I still don't know if there's space in the main deck. Anyways, we'll move on. The last 2 cards were to Meki the Broken Seal. I think this card is just like really good in blue decks right now that can untap stupid amounts of energy. And it's just a really good card in general at the moment because you can call Gohan Superhero 8 and they can't play their secret rare, which is like the main threat against Crimson, but also the main threat against a lot of blue decks right now. And it also happens to hit the Gohan rare as well, which like isn't super relevant all the time, but sometimes it can come up, so it's a nice addition. But then against Blue Beerus, you can call 6-drop Vegeta GT. Like, there's always just a key card that you can stop your opponent from playing for a turn, which is huge. So this card's, again, just like a nice generic side deck piece. And I did really try hard to find space for one of the 5-star Parasitic Darkness Ball, the blue one, so that you can search it off of this, just because I've always liked that tech, but yeah, I never really found the space for that one, so I don't think it was realistic for me to find space for that cheeky +1. But that is the entire Gamma list, and that's kind of my breakdown for what it was like playing in Worlds and my reasoning behind all of the choices and stuff. Again, got second, pretty happy with that, but next year I have to take it all. There's no way I let myself come anywhere lower than first, especially after what happened in that game 3 against Philip. But have to give a massive congrats to our new world champion Philip. He's an amazing player and one of the more powerful deck builders that I've seen in the game for sure. With the not even a scratch tech for me, and with the obvious 7-drop freezer for his deck. Once I saw that, I was like, this guy's the real deal. So I'm very glad that he was the one to win it if it wasn't me. And I have to give a massive shout out to all my opponents and all of the guys that I met there. They were all really lovely people. It was an amazing experience. It was a dream come true, and I'm going to be back next year to win it all, just like I've already said. So other than that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys have any questions about the deck or about what it was like at Worlds, I'm sure I'll be around to answer them if you want to drop them in the comments. Thanks very much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed, as always, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.